to the whole incredible team for organizing today, and to all of you who show up like you always show up. Welcome. Alex and Eleanor both set the stage. This has been just an extraordinary year. And while we don't get to choose what happens to us, we do get to choose how we will respond. And this has also been a year where, because of you, our partners, we have been able to respond in ways bigger than maybe we ever thought we could be. And we have learned through it that we really were an organization born in crisis, and one who really rises to crisis. And if there's one thing you can take from today, I hope that it is how swiftly Acumen is moving, and that right now we're in, all of us, in a moment where we are thinking about who will we be after we get through this, and we will get through this. Who must we become? And those are really questions on our minds, and I hope that you hold them through the day. When you think about what we have all gone through this year, it's easy to think that it's never happened before, not like this. I hear the word unprecedented all the time. The year started off, as Alex said, with a great sense of hope and optimism, and then we were hit with what we thought was a trifecta, and what we're seeing now is really a quadro. Starting with the coronavirus, 1 million deaths around the world, many economies going into a standstill. The human cost of this has been extraordinary. What we all saw was, not only did this pandemic emerge as a heat-seeking missile aimed squarely and directly at the poor and vulnerable, but it exposed all of the gaping wounds of our systems, not just our health system, but our education systems, our food systems, our workforce development systems, our criminal justice systems. That level of inequality and injustice that we all experienced unleashed then a racial and social justice reckoning that started in the United States with Black Lives Matter and rippled across the world, including in all of the regions in which Acumen operates. The feelings and the shades may have been different, but the expressions of needing to look at ourselves was something that our communities felt across the world. And then, to make sure that we were fully awake, Mother Nature came in hard to remind us that just as COVID is hitting the poor and the vulnerable, cataclysmic climate change is right here with us, and we have to move with it. You think about the fires in California, the floods in Louisiana. Karachi was really deeply, wildly flooded. We saw cyclones in Bangladesh and India, locusts in India and in East Africa, which also experienced droughts and rises of other diseases in addition to COVID. And then, needless to say, the United States may be the most visible right now in terms of a level of divisiveness and dividedness that I certainly have not experienced in my lifetime. But this is also a virus that is spreading across the world and is showing up in all of our regions. And so, as I said, the question for us is not just, can we articulate what has gone wrong, but how do we make it right? David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, says that we're going through a moral convulsion. And in a conversation I had with him, he said, the question now, though, is who are the builders? What we now need is to reimagine the institutions, and that is what Acumen does. And so if there's a single theme, and this is where being the daughter of an All-American football player comes through, the great American football coach, Vince Lombardi, used to say, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And that is really what Acumen has been doing, certainly since March. First thing we did, and our board chair, Shiza Razavi, called me in the first week of lockdown and said, we've got companies and fellows across the world who are dealing with some of the most vulnerable populations on the planet. What can Acumen do? Our team mobilized, raised 2 different funds, about $7 million in grant monies from you, from our partners, from our board, largely from our board, and some corporations who just stepped up. And then changed all of our systems internally so that we could decentralize and make rapid grants, very small, to our fellows and concessionary debt to our companies, so they could not only keep jobs in place, and we've saved tens of thousands, but actually help these companies pivot into the future. Leslie Labruto and Sarah Bieber, two young people from our team during the energy crisis, even before lockdown in the United States, when China was going through the coronavirus, recognized that Acumen is now the largest off-grid electricity investor for the poor in the world, and that we had a special responsibility to ensure that this entire sector, which now represents about 380,000 jobs and 500 companies, didn't completely fall off the cliff. Black Lives Matter asked us as an organization to do a deep reckoning with ourselves. And so we thought about not only our teams, but and how we operate, but also the governing structures at Acumen. And we see where we have work to do, particularly as we look to include individuals from all of our regions on our board. And it's something I hope you all keep in mind as we think about that. Acumen America had a light shone on it because of Black Lives Matter. And we're quite proud of where Acumen America stands. If venture puts about 2% of all its funds into founders of color and women, Acumen's at 60%. And the companies in the United States as well is showing the power of entrepreneurs that can pivot in crisis using moral imagination and partner with government and with corporations. And this is what we see as our next chapter as well. And then, as Eleanor mentioned, Acumen Academy. We had all of these plans to go into new regions where Acumen had never existed before. On lockdown, we asked ourselves, is this the moment to do online programming where Acumen doesn't even have brand in some of these countries like Malaysia and Bangladesh? And we said, yes, keep moving. And it's been incredible to watch this team now run 9 regional programs online in partnership with some of you to bring Acumen Fellows to the next level. But we also saw that Acumen Academy's vision has always been an online academy, the World School for Social Change. And in many ways, what COVID did was accelerate our work to online so that we could really think about how do you scale and teach not only content, but also character. It's what we represent, and what other partnerships do we need to build so that we can do that better, deeper, faster. Because if there's a single technology that is needed, if there is a single silver bullet, I think we can all agree it is moral leadership, which looks to be in too short supply when it comes to too many of our political leaders. And then we had a 14-city book tour, pretty much locked and loaded across the United States for a May 5th book launch when lockdown happened, and watching the team again, just pivot, not miss a beat, reach out to our community. So many of you who bought books, who held events. We ended up having 55 book events and 60 podcasts, as I said, in partnership with so many of you. And it's been thrilling to watch. The team also created a master course for the book called The Path to Moral Leadership. And corporations like SAP have been having their employees take that course. It also gives us a sense of what we can do in the future in more powerful ways. We learned a lot about ourselves. Most importantly, in this time of so much activism, what we saw is that we are builders. As I said before in the conversation with David, it really struck me that for 20 years, we've been reimagining capitalism. We've been looking to think about how we use capital as a tool, not be controlled by it. And we've been building other tools in our toolbox all along. And so for our next chapter, we want to lean even deeper into the kinds of institutions that we can and will and must build that are inclusive, that are sustainable. We saw what it means at a visceral level again to stand with the poor, and that is where Acumen belongs. Our emergency funds particularly allowed us to become proximate, to immerse in lives of the poor, even though we weren't able to travel into the villages, into the slums. We saw the level of despair and the level of suffering for so many students who had to go home, to families of high stress where everyone lived together, where there not only was hunger, but violence. And we watched our fellows pivot again in just extraordinary ways to ensure, even if they couldn't teach them someplace, they could get them games to play. They could get them some kinds of learning opportunities. They could get them food. And so being part of that, I think, changed all of us. We saw too that we can unlock capital, and that maybe Acumen's mission isn't just about raising philanthropic capital and then turning around and investing it as a patient capital, but that we now have access to a suite of different kinds of capital instruments. And our platform is growing strong enough that we can help others raise it, deploy it, and we can learn from what they do. And the Emergency Fund for Energy is a real example of that. We will not be managing the debt fund. It's not what we do. But we could help put the capital together, and we hopefully will end up administering a piece of it because trusted partners trust Acumen to then help them identify and ensure that we've got the right management for this fund. We want to do more of that. Wouldn't have happened if we weren't seen as trusted ecosystem builders. We're not just an impact investor. Acumen is here to solve the toughest problems of poverty. And now, as I said, we've not only talked about, but really put into action at rapid speed what it means to have a whole toolbox that we can deploy so that we can move towards solving actual problems. The other thing we saw, again, is the power of being a globally connected, locally rooted community that has boots on the ground, local offices, local teams that understand the situation, can move rapidly and be supported by all of us at the center. And that's an incredible asset to have built over these last 20 years. And even though we'll be 20 in 2021 next year, we also saw that we can be incredibly nimble. And that is a big confidence builder. Where so many talked about what needed to be done, we just got down to the work of doing it. And literally tens of thousands lives, well, actually millions of lives were changed as a result of it. And we saw finally the strength in the community, all of you. It's actually, ironically, an area where we've underinvested. And in this year, we've really understood not only how important our corporate partners are, our individual philanthropists are, our fellows, our entrepreneurs, the universities with which we're partnering are needed to make the kinds of change that we need to build in the world. And so as we think about the end of 2020, which is a year I think all of us will be happy to see in the rearview mirror, we are not losing our urgency. In fact, we are doubling down. And no one says it better than Martin Luther King, where he says, we are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. There is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action. And so we end this year with 5 questions that we're starting to have conversations with our board and our senior team and some of you to think about who we need to be in this next chapter. The first is, where and how do we unlock more capital? We've seen now the power of early stage angel investing, watching what the fellows were able to do with these small grants was really powerful to us. We also saw how many of our fellows are not yet investment ready. And so there's a real area of work to be done. Patient capital is what we have been doing for a long time. The world is now ready to be more open to what that means and how we define it as long-term capital, concessionary rates, so that we can give entrepreneurs the opportunity when it's needed to make real change. And then, of course, what's the role of the for-profit impact funds? The second is how best to use our voice. Sitting at the front lines over these 50 plus book events has really taught me firsthand just how divided we are, even around the issue of how we solve our problems and get out of this situation. Generationally, we see a whole group of young people that see capitalism as the problem. Institutions like corporations, not to be trusted. Pretty much anyone in authority. And so I have given talks and been asked questions about whether social enterprise is just tweaking a system that is the root of all evil. On the other hand, I've been in conversations where more ideologically market-driven individuals feel that stakeholder models of capitalism is fuzzy capitalism, will never work. And so once again, Acumen finds itself as the bridge between these worlds, unapologetically saying that our job is to focus on solving the problem using the right kind of capital, invested in the right kind of character, who we can accompany, and surrounded by the right community. That's a nuanced message. It's time for us to do it even better, even louder, and with more of you. To do that, Acumen is always focused on finding and building role models, business models, and spreading our ethos. We are now on track in energy as we look at SDG 7 or universal energy access to be a real player in not only building companies that have served over 100 million people, but changing the overall system. What else do we have to do? And where are the other areas where Acumen may play an outsized role in actually changing systems? One area that's of real interest to us is in the agricultural commodities value chain, where farmers in poor countries are growing and producing things like coffee and chocolate and selling them to wealthier consumers. There are real opportunities there. How does Acumen go, again, from building strong companies like Azahar or supporting them to actually shifting systems? How do we become a single community? One of the unintended consequences of decentralizing Acumen is that while we saw enormous energy and real results, so did we see a number of different communities emerge on Acumen's platform. They're powerful communities, and there's a need for individual cohorts. And yet our partners and our companies and our fellows are also all part of the same community as our course takers. And so how do we create one voice for the world that is really standing for this nexus of reimagined capitalism that put our shared humanity and the sustainability of the earth at the center, and moral leadership that enables that to be built in a way that unapologetically requires all of us? And that brings us to the last question that Acumen is thinking about. How best do we spread our ethos? Of course, we've got Acumen Academy. That's our big bet to bring these ideas and find those leaders around the world who want to put into action solutions, whether they are coming from social enterprise, from the corporate world, from government. Acumen wants to identify those individuals, support them, and create role models with them. And at the same time, we realize that we need to get way beyond our trusted community. To those that have never heard of us, may not even like us, but it's time for Acumen to be part of that larger conversation. And here again is where we need you. We want to think with you about how do we break into those new communities so that this is a conversation that we know the world is yearning for and that we can help facilitate and deepen. And so we've got a lot on our mind, all of these 5 questions, and yet there is nothing in this moment of so much despair, of so much mistrust, of so much division, like the possibility of being able to identify, support, and be a community of individuals that are working on solving our toughest problems in ways that demand that we learn the skills and the tools of transcending difference across race and religion and class and nation and tribe and caste, and that we build institutions, companies, organizations, families that are inclusive, that prioritize the poor and the vulnerable, and then ensure the sustainability of the earth. That's who we are. It is who we have always been. And this is our time. And so for the rest of the 2 hours that we have together, hold those ideas, know how needed you are, and know that this work would not be possible without you.